Hello everybody, my name is Gabby Turner and welcome to Astro Hi-Fi. In this video we are going to be looking at a chart cast for the moment of the new moon in Virgo on August 27th, 2022. That new moon is going to be at 4 degrees of Virgo. So we're going to be looking at what's going on energetically. Now you'll notice that I have a written version of this content in the description box below. So for those of you who find it easier to take in and absorb information through reading rather than listening, or if you kind of like to do a little bit of both, I can't guarantee that they're going to match up exactly, but there is a written, version of this content in the description box below. And there's always a moon magic tidbit at the top of that, which kind of gives my insight into, if you're going to be doing moon magic with this particular new moon, what the energy, or one of the energies that would be most readily available based on these astrological placements. So my tidbit for this new moon is that it's a great time to manifest expanded knowledge or insights, to pierce the veil in a manner that is safe for the initiate. So we'll get into more of the specifics of why that is and get a broader overview of what's going on this month as well. So like I said, this new moon places the sun and the moon together, of course, which is what happens to create a new moon, at 4 degrees of Virgo. And the 4th degree is very heavily emphasized with this new moon. As you can see, the sun and the moon are at 4 Virgo. Pholus, which we'll talk about in detail here in a moment, is at 4 degrees of Capricorn. And Mars is at 4 degrees of Gemini. Jupiter is pretty close to the 4th degree as well. It's hanging out at 7 degrees of Aries. And Mercury is at 1 degree of Libra. We're not talking too much about Mercury in this particular video, but we do have a lot of planets hanging out at the initial degrees, or the very beginning degrees of various signs. So that's just something to note, and especially, of course, if you have something at the 4th degree of any sign, you'll want to take note that the sun, the moon, Mars, and Pholus are all at that 4th degree. All right, so let's talk about Pholus, because the new moon is making a trine aspect, which is a 120 degree aspect. It's a favorable aspect. They're both in earth signs here, with the new moon in Virgo and Pholus in Capricorn. Pholus is classified as a centaur, similar to Chiron. Chiron is much more popular in contemporary astrology, so you've probably heard of Chiron. And a lot of you have probably heard about Pholus as well, but for folks who haven't, I just like to put that out there. I believe, and I could be wrong here, but I think that a centaur planetary object is larger than an asteroid, but smaller than a dwarf planet. I think, I don't know. But these are just various classifications. In any case, let's talk about what Pholus represents symbolically. Pholus represents something akin to the opening of Pandora's box. And you've probably heard the myth of Pandora's box. This box was opened, all of this chaos emerged, and then it couldn't be put back in the box. The unleashing of consequences that cannot be reversed. Sometimes when we make choices in life, it is like going down a path that we cannot turn back from. And at other times we can, right? But Pholus has to do with those circumstances when we really can't reverse and go back. This path has taken us down a road that has completely changed our lives. It's completely changed drastically circumstances around us as well. All right, in Pholus's case, we also have to be mindful of the path that other people might push us down, like when it comes to groupthink or peer pressure, and the unwanted and destructive consequences that can result from these situations as well. Pholus was a wise centaur, unlike most other centaurs who were bawdy and callous. A lot of times the centaurs, generally speaking, are said to be similar to like frat boys, you know what I mean. So we're not trying to stereotype, but that type of energy. They like to get drunk, they like to be loud, they like to, kind of like fight and be rough. That's what centaurs mostly were like. But Pholus was quite different, also similar to Chiron. They were both more kind of civilized, if you will. So Pholus one day was visited by Hercules. Hercules was in the process of completing a series of labors or quests. So he's just completed, I believe, his 4th labor, and then he comes along on his journey. He comes across Pholus, and he wants to drink some wine that Pholus has in his possession. In some versions of the story, Pholus tries to persuade Hercules against drinking the wine, and in others, he actually provides it to Hercules in an attempt to be an obliging host. So those are 2 possible scenarios. But in any case, Hercules really wants to drink this wine, and he is definitely requesting it and being assertive about his desire for this wine. But when the wine is uncorked, it draws the attention of a stampede of centaurs, not the civilized ones, but the bawdy ones, the frat boy centaurs. These centaurs wanted that wine. Hercules killed most of them with poisoned arrows. But in the confusion, one of his arrows also hits Chiron, who, as I said, like Pholus, is an uncharacteristically noble and civilized centaur. Chiron goes on to have an incurable wound, a wound that leads him to become a master healer in his journey to find a way to treat himself. So that was one of the consequences of this wine being uncorked. Another consequence was all of the deaths of all of these centaurs. And finally, as Pholus was examining one of the arrows that killed a centaur, one of these poison-tipped arrows that Hercules had, Pholus was marveling at how such a small thing can bring death. And in that moment, he himself, as he was examining this poisoned arrow, becomes poisoned and dies. Pholus, the planetary object itself, has an orbital path that connects those of Saturn and Neptune, bridging the gap between the themes of concrete materialism, duty, and responsibility that Saturn represents, and the transcendental divine oneness and piercing of the veil of reality that Neptune represents. So what is the message here? Pholus had a duty as the bearer of wine, or bearer of the Neptunian process of spiritual transcendence. Transcendence can be utilized simply as a means of escapism, such as getting drunk, or it can be utilized for access to our divinity. When we are not responsible in our approach to mysticism, altered states of consciousness, divination, etc., we can attract unwanted chaos and destruction. With this new moon in Virgo making a trine aspect to Pholus in Capricorn, we all have the opportunity to make wise choices regarding our use of substances and any other means of access to the other side of the veil. So mysticism, divination, meditation, going into a trance state, all of these things. We're sort of obligated, or this energy tells us it's going to be easier for us in a way to understand and apply our sense of responsibility and maturity as it relates to those things. Like Pholus, we shall all pierce the veil in death, and every piercing of the veil is, in essence, a death of the forgetting of our divine origins. So we need to go through these sort of symbolic deaths in order to understand who we truly are in a more divine sense. Capricorn represents anything that has established itself and has shown an ability to exist throughout time and throughout the changes of generations. Pholus in this sign is prepared to disrupt what might have seemed immovable, to drastically alter the structures of our lives. The new moon in Virgo shows us ready to put forth the effort required to make the best use of those powerful disruptions, paving or preparing the way for a new vision to take place, a vision that can last. All right, and so you can also see, let's backtrack here. So this blue line here that we were looking at, that's the trine between the new moon and Pholus. There's also a square aspect here between Mars and the new moon, Mars and Gemini. And I want to point out that this square to Mars will become a T-square when this moon phase reaches the full moon phase on September 10th. So on September 10th, there will be a full moon in Pisces, which means the sun will be in Virgo, the moon will be in Pisces, and Mars will have moved forward enough degrees in Gemini that these three, the sun, the moon, and Mars, will be forming a T-square at this point. So currently all we have is a square, right? Because the sun and moon are conjoined. But this square, which is a harsh aspect, is also really preparing us for a longer cycle that emphasizes Mars's movement through the sign of Gemini. So the moon cycle right now is strongly emphasizing that transit of Mars through Gemini. So what does this mean? Mars in Gemini can be rather argumentative, or even an intellectual bully. At its best, though, Mars in Gemini strengthens an interest in learning and disseminating information. Keeping in mind the Pholus aspect to this new moon, it's important that we respect the intellectual interests and perspectives of others, while also asserting respect for our own interest and perspectives. Getting bulldozed into a particular mentality just because it's what the crowd is doing, or because a persuasive person has convinced you, is to be actively avoided. Propaganda is a great example of this effect. People can become riled up through propaganda and feel compelled to engage in behaviors that otherwise they would not, leading to regret at the very least. Advertising can also influence our thought processes, leading us to purchase things we don't even want or need or perhaps cannot afford. So it's a time when the importance of thinking for ourselves is noted in the stars. You know, they're trying to, this moment with the new moon is trying to point that out to us. I think the square of Mars and Gemini to the new moon also indicates that as we begin new efforts at this time, there will be people who disagree with us, and vice versa. You know, people may not agree with the choices we're making in life. We may not agree with theirs. We have to be careful of debates that could turn into hostile arguments, especially with the Pholus influence. Words we speak could attract unwanted attention or unwanted reactions. Our intellectual interests could also lead us down paths that are both mind-blowing, but perhaps even court danger. Is it worth it? It is for us to decide. This is a time that something, of course, is going to be uncorked. So it's just how do we want to move with that energy? So let's also notice there is an inconjunct aspect, actually, between Jupiter at 7 degrees Aries and the new moon. So again, there is a strong theme here regarding expanding one's knowledge base, perhaps impulsively, but also with great passion. Passion for new knowledge and experience abounds with Jupiter in Aries, but it will be difficult to see how that passion can coexist with the more careful, dutiful nature of the new moon in Virgo, especially with that trine in Pholus that wants to be very discriminating about how to go about expanding consciousness safely. So let's look here, when we draw all of these aspect lines back on, we have an aspect pattern that, from my research, because it's not one that I've really seen so much before, but from my research, this is called a trapeze aspect pattern. But I couldn't find a lot of information on people's interpretations of what this pattern indicates. But to me, it kind of looks like a cup. Of course, if we take the trapeze symbolism in and of itself, the trapeze is a moment where we can access this sort of wonderful, transcendence, and this transcendent moment of someone, if you've ever seen a trapeze act, it's like it's amazing to watch that a person could do such a thing, that people can do such a thing, but there's a precarious balance that has to be struck, and that energy is definitely present here with this new moon. But what it also looks to me is a little bit like the shape of a cup, with this trine between Pholus and the new moon being sort of like the top of the cup. And if we think of these two squares as the sides, the square of Jupiter with Pholus, where Jupiter in Aries just wants to burst into new experiences, and it's a little bit like those centaurs wanting to burst in and to grab that wine, or like Hercules, who just demanded, I'm thirsty. I want, I want the abundance of this wine. I want the wonderful blessing of this wine on my lips. In a square aspect to Pholus in Capricorn, who wants to be more careful and cautious. Pholus understands at some level that it is dangerous to uncork that wine, because he knows what the other centaurs are like. He has a sense that this would be dangerous to uncork the wine. And then we've already discussed the square aspect between Mars and Gemini and the new moon. But these two squares, they give the strength to the cup. Squares are 90-degree angles, and although they do provide a sort of frustration between planets that are square to each other, that frustration also creates a sort of strength. When you're grabbing a cup, you want the sides of the cup not to collapse, right? If you've ever grabbed like a plastic cup, like a flimsy plastic cup, you know that it can just crush in on itself. But for a cup to, successfully serve our needs, it needs to have hard, immovable sides that we can grasp onto firmly. And so with this aspect pattern, we see the sides here with these two squares. And then the bottom of the cup, what's supporting the contents of the cup here, is the sextile between Jupiter in Aries and Mars in Gemini. Again, both energies of really robustly wanting to seek new knowledge, new experiences, new information, to disseminate information. This very strong desire to learn and to grow and to expand one's mind, to broaden one's horizons. And the top of the cup with the trine being the most pleasant aspect here, that's where we access the contents of the cup. That's where we access that beautiful wisdom, or in this case, the wine. The wine that can bring us access to an understanding of what's beyond the veil of transcendence. So again, as I was talking about when I spoke about the symbolism of this trine, it's a moment when we have to be of service to our responsibility when it comes to accessing Neptunian transcendence, the elixir of transcendence, whatever that might be for us. So if you're seeking, greater esoteric knowledge, for example, or if you're trying to go into trance states, if you're contacting spirit guides, using forms of divination, that gives you a sort of access to something beyond the veil. But that access, although it quenches a strong thirst indicated by this Jupiter and Mars sextile, a very strong thirst for what knowledge could come of that, what experience could come of that. But it has to be partaken of wisely. So that's primarily what I wanted to talk about with this, but I also want to mention the fact that we have a T-square aspect. This isn't aspecting the new moon itself, but we have a T-square aspect going on. Actually, this is a grand cross because the south node is over here in Scorpio. It's just not drawn onto the chart. But we have a grand cross between Saturn and Venus, who are opposing each other and who are both making square aspects to Uranus and the nodal axis. So let's go ahead and talk about that as well. So first of all, what does Venus in Leo represent? I'm going to start with Venus down here because she's such a pleasant energy, and I just love the energy of Venus in Leo. When Venus is in Leo, she kind of wants to have just fun and self-expression in her social experiences. She really wants to enjoy lighthearted self-expression. She wants to have fun. This is like girls just want to have fun type of energy with Venus and Leo. But not just girls, everybody. Everybody just wants to have fun with Venus and Leo. This is like going to a fun party. This is like going to a festival, going to an amusement park, like just letting loose. Venus in Leo also just loves creative and artistic self-expression and having the capacity to share that with other people and to see and experience also the creative and artistic self-expression that other people are involved in. Venus in Leo loves to shine and be bubbly and bright, but Venus in Leo also appreciates other people's ability to shine and be bubbly and bright. It's a very fun, it's a very light-filled energy. So again, like girls/people just want to have fun. That's what Venus in Leo is about. And Venus is making an opposition aspect to Saturn in Aquarius. So what is Saturn in Aquarius about? So Saturn is very well placed in Aquarius because this is one of the signs that it rules, along with Capricorn. Saturn in Aquarius, to me, really embodies that philosophy of the 7 generations, which I believe comes from the Lakota tribe. I could be wrong about that, but it's this concept that when we make decisions, we, especially really important decisions that are going to have wide-reaching consequences, we need to be thinking ahead to the next 7 generations and how our choices are going to be affecting those next 7 generations. Aquarius is a very futuristic sign, so Aquarius brings Saturn that capacity to look ahead to the future. And Saturn is always thinking about structures and durability, sustainability. So when Saturn is in Aquarius, it really has that capacity to, how can I be responsible and mature in making decisions now and establishing the way for the next 7 generations to be fruitful and to benefit and to flourish. It's a beautiful energy, really. So when we have 2 planets in opposition, obviously they're expressing a very different quality, but these are 2 different qualities that, with the opposition, can come into a balance and bring a certain harmony to each other. We have to remember, that the ascendant, for example, is always opposite the descendant. The ascendant represents the self. The descendant represents other and how we form partnerships. So those things are in opposition because the self as a me and then the self when it becomes a we are obviously 2 different things, but they work together. When you're in a relationship, you're still an individual, right? So those 2 things do work together harmoniously. So even though these 2 energies of Saturn and Aquarius and Venus and Leo seem to have very different interests, right? Venus and Leo is like, oh man, like let's have fun, let's express ourselves, and Saturn is, maturely thinking about the future generations and how to prepare the way for them. So these 2 energies want to come into balance, though. They want to come into balance and work together. And I feel very much that they can, because, one of the ways that we prepare the way is through an understanding of the inner child, through understanding the need for artistic expression and things like that. And also Venus and Leo is just incredibly creative. So that creativity and ability to think outside the box is helpful to Saturn in Aquarius, who wants to build structures. Okay, and then we have, like I said, these are both making square aspects to Uranus and to the nodal axis. So this has been going on for a while, of course. Uranus and the north node in Taurus, and the south node over here in Scorpio. So Uranus, being the modern day ruler of Aquarius, it's kind of a similar energy to Saturn in Aquarius, but not quite. Uranus has a difficult time in Taurus because it's a very different energy from what Uranus's natural state is. Uranus naturally wants to break things apart. It wants to bring chaos. It wants to break down the existing order. It's in the sign of Taurus, and Taurus likes stability, so it's hard to understand how those 2 things can coexist at once. But we've seen it throughout the entire time that Uranus has been transiting through Taurus. Uranus has brought change and innovation and futuristic, forward-thinking qualities to Taurian things like business and money. So we've seen things like cryptocurrency. In terms of art and aesthetics and beauty and business, we've noticed Uranus bringing androgyny and the internet into the world of beauty and makeup It's sort of it has been the internet age of beauty products with a strong androgynous lean to it during Uranus's transit in Taurus so far. So even though this isn't a placement that makes a lot of sense for Uranus, it's like unfamiliar territory to Uranus, we've seen lots of really interesting expressions here. We've also seen through the pandemic how Uranus has brought into Taurus the need to innovate very quickly, because supply chain demand, supply chains are sort of broken down, and even the way that we do shopping has changed. Things like that. So Uranus here, even though this is a square, I think it is, because this is a grand cross. The grand cross in and of itself brings stability. All 4 points of a grand cross do want to work together to bring some sort of stability and structure. This is the foundation upon which a new creative vision for the future, a future that can sustainably benefit the 7 generations to come, can be laid. And it requires lots of innovations to do that. Innovations that are a response sometimes to instability, but also that creatively innovate in order to regain stability, ironically. And I think with Uranus conjunct the North Node in Taurus, we have to create a new sort of stability. The old ways of doing business, the old ways of accessing and utilizing resources are not sustainable, right? Hence this square between Saturn and Uranus. We haven't had a sustainable approach that's going to allow us to last for 7 generations. So the North Node is saying, hey, the challenge right now is that there is a lot of instability and we need to innovate quickly. All right. And then the South Node in Scorpio is also just talking about our collective resource needs, that we can't just think about our own personal needs. Businesses that only think about profit, which is a more Taurian goal, without thinking about the collective needs or how resources are actually collective resources, that they don't belong to just one person. That's a scorpionic need. And Scorpio also has to do with our ability to access a sense of empowerment and use that sense of empowerment to bring about transformations. The South Node is where we already have a lot of strength. So that strength for us collectively to be empowered is very strong right now. People are quite empowered. They understand that they have the power to bring about change and transformations. And that's being balanced out by this energy of instability that is leading towards innovations in business and in finances, in currency, in our use of resources, and all of those things. So this is actually a very beautiful grand cross. I love it. All right, so that's pretty much all I have to say about this new moon. If there are other things that you want to point out, to add, or to respond to, let me know in the comments below. You can also check out my Patreon if you're interested. And thank you so much for watching. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.